The ocean was calm that morning, a silver mirror stretching beyond the horizon, but beneath that quiet surface the world was burning. In February 1945, Japan was standing at the edge of destruction. Its cities were in ruins, its empire shrinking, and its pilots, once the pride of the Pacific, were now being trained to die. The war had turned into a race between courage and inevitability. Across the vast Pacific, the American fleet moved like a tide that could not be stopped. Their carriers launched planes that darkened the sky, their radar eyes saw everything long before it came close. And somewhere in that great machine of war, a handful of men and women worked inside dimly lit rooms, surrounded by wires and paper, breaking the codes that once hid the secrets of an empire. The story begins in a small underground bunker on a humid island in the Pacific. The air smelled of sweat and machine oil. Ensign Daniel Reeves sat hunched over his decoding machine, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He had been awake for 30 hours, chasing fragments of Japanese messages intercepted by naval listening posts. Around him, the typewriters clattered like distant gunfire. On the wall hung a large map of the Pacific Ocean, covered in pins and red strings connecting places like Okinawa, Leyte, and Tokyo Bay. Reeves rubbed his temples, reading a half-translated message on the thin yellow paper, Operation 10 Go. Yamato, southward movement. He frowned. The words didn't fit any pattern he knew. Beside him, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell leaned closer. 10 Go? That's a new one. What does it mean? Reeves whispered, maybe it's a codename. Something big, something desperate. Thousands of miles away, on the other side of that vast ocean, a young Japanese pilot named Haruto Sato stared at his reflection in a small pool of rainwater. He was 21 years old, his flight suit too large for his thin frame. Around him, the airfield buzzed with activity, mechanics loading bombs onto planes, priests blessing the pilots before takeoff, the sound of engines roaring in the distance. Haruto's hands trembled slightly as he tied his headband, the white cloth marked with a red rising sun. His commander, Captain Tanaka, stood before the group of pilots, his face calm but his eyes full of something unspoken. Today, Tanaka said, we fly not to return. We fly to defend the soul of our nation. The men bowed, their voices rising together, for the Emperor. Back in the bunker, Reeves's decoding machine spat out another line of text. He froze as he read the translation. Yamato and 9 escorts, prepare for final sortie. Destination Okinawa. His heart began to race. The Yamato, the pride of the Imperial Navy, the largest battleship ever built. If it was moving south, it could only mean one thing. Japan was preparing a final, suicidal attack. He rushed to Sarah. Get Commander Hayes, now. Within minutes, the small bunker filled with tension. Hayes, a tall man with a calm voice and sharp mind, leaned over the map. If Yamato sails, it's the end of their navy. But she can still kill a lot of our boys before she goes down. He looked at Reeves. How sure are you? Reeves swallowed hard. 90%, maybe more. Hayes nodded. Then it's time to tell Admiral Spruance. Night fell across the Pacific like a curtain of ash. On the deck of the American carrier USS Bunker Hill, sailors prepared for the next day's strikes. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with the salty wind. Far above, the stars shimmered faintly through drifting clouds. Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison, one of the most experienced pilots aboard, leaned on the railing, watching the dark horizon. He lit a cigarette, the small flame flickering in the breeze. You ever think about what they're feeling, out there? He asked his wingman. The younger man shrugged. Those kamikaze guys? Guess they're not feeling much, just waiting to die. Morrison exhaled slowly. Yeah, but they believe in something. That's dangerous. Meanwhile, in Japan, Haruto wrote a final letter by candlelight. The paper was thin, the ink faint. Mother, he began, by the time you read this, I will be flying among the clouds. Do not cry for me. I am not afraid. I will become the wind that protects our homeland. He folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his uniform pocket. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of cherry blossoms carried by the night wind. For a brief moment, he thought of home, the laughter of his sister, the sound of the river behind their house, the way the sunlight danced on the water. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would fly. In the early dawn, the Yamato prepared to sail. Her massive guns glistened with dew, and her crew stood at attention along the deck. The ship's engines rumbled to life, shaking the water around her. Admiral Ito, commanding the fleet, stood on the bridge in silence. He knew the truth. They were going on a one-way mission. There was not enough fuel for a return trip. But he said nothing. Duty demanded silence. As the sun rose, the ships of Operation 10 Go began to move south toward Okinawa, a line of steel cutting through the mist. In the decoding bunker, Reeves listened to the latest transmissions. "They've departed Cure," he whispered. Sarah leaned in. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "They're heading straight into our air patrol zone." Hayes immediately sent a priority signal to Fleet Command. Within hours, Admiral Spruance ordered the strike groups to prepare. "If the Yamato wants to die," he said, "we'll oblige her." By midday, American reconnaissance planes had spotted the Japanese fleet. From the sky, the Yamato looked like a dark monster moving through the blue, surrounded by smaller ships like loyal followers. The pilots radioed back coordinates. The answer came swiftly. "Launch all aircraft. Target enemy fleet south of Kyushu." The decks of the carriers erupted with motion. Pilots ran to their planes, mechanics shouted, engines roared to life. Jack Morrison climbed into his cockpit, strapping himself in. "This is it," he muttered. "Let's finish it." The launch officer gave a signal, and one by one, the planes catapulted into the sky. Far below, Haruto and his fellow pilots waited for their turn to rise. Their planes were small, fragile things compared to the mighty Yamato, but they carried the weight of an empire's last hope. Haruto looked at the rising sun painted on his wings and whispered, "Let me be strong." The radio crackled. "All units, take off." Engines screamed as the planes lifted into the morning sky. The final battle had begun. From thousands of feet above, the ocean looked peaceful, but in moments it became chaos. American bombers dived from the clouds, releasing waves of torpedoes and bombs. The Yamato fired back with thunderous fury, her 16-inch guns booming, shells erupting around the attackers. Explosions lit the sea like lightning. Morrison's plane shook violently as he pulled into a steep dive. "Target locked," he shouted. "Let's hit her where it hurts." He released his bomb and climbed sharply, the blast below sending a shockwave through his wings. On the bridge of the Yamato, Admiral Ito gripped the railing as another explosion tore through the ship. Smoke and fire filled the air. "Damage report," he yelled. "Hit near the engine room, sir." Fire spreading. The battleship's guns kept firing, but the sky was full of enemies. Torpedoes struck one after another, lifting the great ship from the water. Crewmen were thrown across the deck. Haruto's formation flew through the smoke, searching for targets. He saw the burning sea below and felt a strange calm. The radio crackled with voices, panic, orders, prayers. And then he heard his commander's voice, "Now, my brothers. For the Emperor." Haruto pushed his throttle forward. The wind screamed past his cockpit. He saw an American destroyer ahead, its guns flashing. Time seemed to slow. He thought of his mother, his sister, the river, the sunlight. Then he closed his eyes. The sky turned white. Reeves listened to the radio reports from the fleet. Enemy battleship hit repeatedly. Explosions observed. "She's going down." He leaned back in his chair, exhausted. Around him, the decoding room was silent except for the hum of machines. Sarah whispered, "It's over." Reeves nodded slowly. "No," he said. "It's only beginning." Because in another hidden facility, deep inside Tokyo, a new code had just been transmitted. One that spoke of vengeance, of sacrifice, of storms yet to come. The morning sky over Okinawa was pale and heavy, a thin mist curling over the water like breath on glass. From a distance, the island looked quiet, but every ridge and cave hid soldiers, guns, and fear. The American fleet stood offshore in a long gray line, engines humming, radar dishes turning like restless eyes. It was April 1945. The invasion of Okinawa had begun, and everyone knew this would be the last great battle before Japan itself. On the deck of the carrier USS Bunker Hill, Jack Morrison checked the fuel line of his Corsair. His hands were steady, but his stomach felt like stone. The loudspeaker cracked through the sea air. Enemy aircraft incoming, bearing 175. Sailors ran for their stations. The calm surface of the sea broke into frantic motion, planes roaring to life, anti-air guns swinging upward. Morrison slid into the cockpit, pulled the canopy down, and muttered, "Here we go again." At that same hour, hundreds of miles away, in an airfield near Kagoshima, Haruto Sato stood beside his Zero fighter. The plane had been repaired twice, patched with metal that didn't quite match its color. Mechanics tightened bolts while a priest moved along the line of aircraft, offering blessings. The smell of incense mixed with engine oil. Haruto's commander, Captain Tanaka, walked past the pilots and stopped in front of him. "You've written your letters?" he asked quietly. Haruto nodded. "Then you're ready." Tanaka's voice trembled only once when he said, "Remember, your spirit will live on." Haruto looked toward the east, where the faint glow of dawn brushed the horizon. He felt no anger, only a deep, slow sadness, as if he were already part of another world. The radio operator waved a red flag. Takeoff order received. Engines screamed into life. One by one, the planes began to roll. Haruto pushed the throttle forward. The wind hit his face, the runway blurred beneath him, and in seconds he was climbing into the clouds. Back at the Allied Code Center, far from the roar of battle, Daniel Reeves leaned over a set of intercept sheets. The messages had changed tone, shorter, more frantic. Every few hours, new call signs appeared and then vanished. "They're launching in waves," he said to Sarah Mitchell. "Groups of 10, sometimes 20. They're not coordinating like before." Sarah's brow furrowed. "That's because they don't need to come back. They just need to hit." Reeves nodded grimly. "And they're learning which routes our radar doesn't cover." He scribbled notes across a map. "If they hit the carriers, they'll cripple the invasion." The first kamikaze wave reached the fleet before noon. Radar picked up the blips, but there were too many. Alarms screamed across the ships. Morrison's fighter banked hard into the sun, searching for the enemy. Then he saw them, tiny specks diving from the clouds, sunlight flashing off their wings. "They're coming straight in," someone shouted over the radio. Tracers filled the sky. One Japanese plane exploded in a burst of fire. Another kept coming even as its tail burned. Morrison locked on and fired, shells tearing through the Zero's fuselage, but the pilot inside didn't flinch. The flaming aircraft plunged toward a destroyer below and slammed into the deck. A column of fire shot into the air. The sound was everywhere: explosions, alarms, shouted orders. Morrison's squadron tried to intercept the rest, weaving through black smoke and falling debris. He caught a glimpse of another Zero breaking through and diving at the bunker hill. He shouted into his mic, "He's on you. He's on you." Guns on the carrier opened up, but the kamikaze came through the wall of fire and smashed into the deck just forward of the island tower. The blast threw sailors off their feet. Flames roared across the flight deck. Bombs began to cook off. Morrison could only watch from above as his home ship burned. Inside the command bunker on Okinawa's shore, Admiral Spruance's staff tried to make sense of the chaos. "We've got multiple hits on Pickett destroyers," an officer reported. "They're coming in from all directions." Spruance's jaw tightened. "Then we change the pattern. Rotate the radar screens, overlap the coverage. And tell every gunner, no hesitation." He looked out the window toward the smoke on the horizon. "They're fighting with their souls now." Back in Kagoshima, Haruto's unit received word that the first attack had succeeded. The airfield fell silent. No one cheered. The mechanics stood with their heads bowed. Captain Tanaka read the list of names from a crumpled paper, every pilot who hadn't returned. His voice cracked at the end. "Prepare the next wave," he said quietly. Haruto's heart pounded. He had survived his first mission only because his plane's fuel line had leaked. He had been ordered to land halfway. Now he felt the weight of survivor's guilt pressing down like the humid air around him. That night, Reeves couldn't sleep. The code room was lit only by green lamps, their glow reflecting off metal desks. He replayed the intercepted transmissions again and again, searching for a pattern. "They're coordinating by weather reports," he realized suddenly. They use civilian meteorological broadcasts as time markers. He circled a line of text. If we jam those frequencies, we might delay the next wave. Sarah looked up, her eyes tired but bright. Quote, that could save hundreds of lives. Reeves grabbed his headset and called communications. Tell the fleet. Disrupt weather transmissions between sectors Bravo and Charlie. Do it now. Hours later, as dawn returned to the sea, the second kamikaze wave met confusion. Their timing was off. Half turned back, others wandered into storm clouds. Allied interceptors picked them off one by one. Morrison, now flying from a temporary carrier, shot down 2 before running out of ammunition. When he landed, he sat on the deck, helmet in his lap, watching the horizon glow orange with distant fires. They just keep coming, he whispered. They don't stop. Haruto watched the sky from his base, smoke still rising from the morning's failed launches. He wondered if courage meant dying without hesitation, or living with the shame of surviving. Captain Tanaka approached him quietly. Your plane will be ready by noon, he said. Haruto hesitated. Captain, do you ever think we might lose? Tanaka looked toward the mountains. A samurai does not think of losing, only of duty. But his eyes betrayed the exhaustion that words could not hide. As the days passed, Okinawa became a storm of metal and fire. American soldiers fought across the beaches, inch by inch, while above them the air battles raged without pause. The kamikazes struck with relentless fury, sometimes alone, sometimes in swarms. Each attack cost Japan another piece of its future. And every message Reeves decoded told the same story: fewer planes, fewer pilots, but never fewer missions. By late April, the Allied fleet had endured over 1,000 suicide attacks. Some ships were sunk, many were scarred. Yet the line held. Technology, coordination, and pure endurance slowly turned the tide. Reeves and Sarah hardly spoke anymore, there was no need. Their world was numbers, frequencies, and fatigue. One night she looked at him and said, when this ends, what will we be? Reeves didn't answer. The machines kept clicking, translating death into data. The sky over Okinawa grew darker each day, not from clouds but from smoke. By May the air carried the sour scent of burning oil that clung to every uniform, every ship. The battle had become a heartbeat of attack and silence, until men no longer knew which day it was. Jack Morrison had stopped counting the missions. Each one felt the same: take off, climb through the haze, find the next wave before it found them. He moved by instinct now, a pattern of motion that replaced thought. When he landed after one mission, the deck crews no longer cheered. They just nodded, rearmed his plane, and pushed it back into line. Someone had painted the side of the flight tower with white marks for every ship hit by a kamikaze. There were too many to count. Morrison looked at them and thought, every mark is a name. Far away, Haruto Sato stood at the edge of the runway. His new aircraft shimmered faintly in the sun. The mechanics had replaced its worn engine with parts taken from 2 wrecks. He touched the cool metal of the fuselage as if it were alive. Around him, other pilots prepared in silence. No one spoke of glory anymore. They spoke of home, of family, of letters waiting to be sent. Haruto tucked a small photograph into his flight suit, his sister standing beside the river. He whispered, one more sunrise. At the Allied Code Center, Daniel Reeves listened to another intercept feed. The voices were faint, distorted by distance. Yet every syllable mattered. He noted a pattern. The enemy was now transmitting shorter coordinates, almost random. They're masking their launch points, he told Sarah Mitchell. They're trying to make us chase ghosts. Sarah rubbed her eyes. They're running out of real bases. The ghosts might be all they have left. Reeves stared at the map. Even ghosts can kill. That afternoon a report arrived from the fleet. 2 destroyers lost, another crippled. The admiral's message was brief: we hold. Continue intercepts. Reeves dropped the note onto his desk. They hold, he repeated quietly, but at what cost? He thought of the sailors out there, the endless horizon, the fire. Then he turned back to the machine. There was no time for pity. On May 11, the largest coordinated kamikaze strike of the campaign began. The weather was perfect, clear skies, calm wind. From Kagoshima and Kyushu airfields, more than 300 planes lifted off. Haruto's group was among them. As they climbed, the coastline fell away behind them like the memory of another life. Over the radio came Captain Tanaka's steady voice, "Remember your purpose. The wind carries us to eternity." The formation turned south toward the dark line of ships beyond the horizon. Radar on the USS Bunker Hill lit up with dozens of blips. Alarms sounded. Gunners rushed to stations. Deck crews cleared the flight paths. Morrison was already airborne when he heard the warning. Multiple bogies inbound, altitude 5,000. His wingman's voice cracked with static. The sky ahead seemed to shimmer as the first Japanese planes broke through the haze, sunlight glinting off their propellers. "They're everywhere," someone yelled. The first wave hit the destroyer screen, explosions blooming like flowers of smoke. Morrison rolled his Corsair into a dive, chasing a Zero that had slipped past. His guns flared, the enemy plane burst apart, fragments spinning into the sea. Another Zero dived straight toward a carrier. Flak shells detonated around it, but it kept coming. Morrison's radio filled with frantic shouts. A white flash, then silence. When the static cleared, the carrier was burning. Haruto's turn came soon after. He followed Tanaka through the clouds, the sea a mirror beneath them. Anti-aircraft bursts dotted the sky like black scars. One by one, his comrades vanished into the smoke. Haruto's mind narrowed to a single thought: reach the ships. But as he descended, a burst of tracer fire ripped across his wing. The plane shuddered, alarms screamed. He fought for control, his vision blurring from the smoke. Below, he saw the flames consuming the fleet and felt an unexpected calm. He pulled up, trying to gain height, trying to breathe. Then another explosion shook him, and the world became light and sound. On the Bunker Hill, chaos reigned. Fires spread across the deck. Ammunition detonated in a chain of flashes. Morrison landed on a nearby escort carrier and watched helplessly as rescue boats swarmed the water. Men leapt into the sea to escape the heat. He whispered, "How many more?" but there was no answer. In the code center, Reeves received the first casualty reports. He read them silently, then looked at the latest intercept. Fragments of broken messages, half-sent coordinates, the word, honor, repeated again and again. He clenched his fists. "They're dying for words," he said bitterly. Sarah put a hand on his arm. "And we're killing for numbers. Maybe that's what war does, it turns belief into code." Reeves looked at her, exhausted. "Then we'd better finish decoding before it turns us into machines." That night the rain came, washing the smoke from the sky. The sea glowed faintly with burning oil. On both sides, survivors stared into the dark and wondered how much more the world could bear. Haruto's photograph drifted somewhere among the waves, the ink fading in the salt water. Rain fell in steady sheets, hissing against the ruined decks. The sea was calm again, almost gentle, as if it wanted to forget. Jack Morrison walked along the carrier's railing, the smell of smoke still caught in his jacket. Below, the water flickered with the reflection of distant fires. He thought of the men who had not come back, of the ones still flying somewhere in the dark. "Maybe they're finally at peace," he whispered. In the code room, Daniel Reeves stared at the last transmission of the night. It was short, just a handful of numbers, followed by a single word: silence. He leaned back, exhausted, unsure if it was a signal or a surrender. Sarah watched the paper curl in his hand. "Maybe it means they've stopped." Reeves nodded slowly. "Or maybe it means they have nothing left to say." Outside, the storm rolled across the Pacific, washing away the traces of battle. For the first time in months, the radio waves were quiet.